Hello, and welcome to the second session of this Making the Difference for Disadvantaged Pupils course with there's a combination between us at the Sheffield Associated Research School and Rotherham School Improvement Service. In this second session, which is intended for self-study, I'll record some things for you to think about and highlight one or two documents that you might want to consider completing as you start to prepare and think about your pupil premium strategy. So you can see that we're here in session 2. And what we're going to do is to get you to think about the existing strategies and policies that you might have in place to look at your pupil premium students or disadvantaged students. And we will send this out to you via email, and you will have had the link for this. And just a reminder, though, that all the resources that we talk about will be available on a Padlet, and the link for this is at the end of the PowerPoint. We're moving on to understanding the tiered approach, and that will be the next face-to-face session at the start of February. And it'll be useful for you in this second self-study section to get some information together, including your current pupil premium strategy, and to do some thinking about that. And the idea is that towards the end of session 3, we'll start to think about whether the current strategy is appropriate, whether we're on the right lines, and whether things need to change. And that will help us then, we're moving on to the later aspects of the course. If we go back to our implementation diagram, you can see that here we are in session 2, still firmly embedded in the explore section, where we're looking at what strategies we need to do, looking at data and considering those aspects before we start to prepare and plan and deliver any changes to our strategy or policies that we might want to implement. And so just a reminder that at the end of session 1, there was a section from myself regarding the use of data in schools, and just to say that the video recording for session 1 is now available on the Padlet, and we can go through these sections. It's important when we are making changes to policies that we are that this is data driven, so that we can identify clearly what the priority should be. And not only do we need to collect data, we need to make sure that it is data that is fit for purpose. We might want to create a rich set of data from multiple sources and then come up with some credible and plausible interpretations of this data. All data has weaknesses, though, and we must be aware of those weaknesses when we are coming to our conclusion, so that we don't put undue weight on data that may well be less good than other data. So just to remind you, at the end of session 1, I asked you to go and find your pupil premium strategy, and so that you can start referring to that. But there are a couple of other documents that we'd like you to start to complete. I am aware of the fact that you are very busy. I am going to suggest that you might make a start on these before the next face-to-face online session, but that you must do what you feel able to do, and all of this is about helping you with your schools and your pupil premium and disadvantaged students. And so I hope that when you do these tasks, from previous experience, we've found out that they're very useful, very thought-provoking, and have challenged the thinking of some previous delegates. So the first one that we're suggesting you look at is, how well do you know your students? How well do you know the pupil premium cohort, the disadvantaged students in your school? And so on the Padlet, there is a copy of this document. And this just asks you to find some data so that you can start thinking about the sense of scale of this. How many pupils are you talking about? And the different makeup of these students. Are they what ethnic background do they come from? What other disadvantages do they have? Are they persistently disadvantaged? Do they have other needs like SEND and things like this? All of these to collect on one document. Again, some of you will have good data systems, other people might have to fish around for a bit, but it is a useful exercise just to find out exactly who these children are. And then secondly, we're going to look at how you create a case study. And again, this, from schools that have done this, we know that this can be a very powerful little activity. It can bring in other stakeholders and other professionals within the school to help with this, to build up this picture of what life might be like for a disadvantaged school, a disadvantaged child in your school. And it could be that, as it says there, that you begin with a child who's had a history of struggling to attain, or you might want one who's got good learning behaviours. It's the child is up to you. Choosing the child may well determine how useful the activity is, but we do know that this has been thought-provoking for colleagues in the past. So that building up this picture of a child, looking at their basic information, and some of this may be easier in a primary context where you may well be just talking to a smaller number of adults, rather than in a secondary school where you might have to consult across a number of departments. And things like, does the child have an emotionally available adult in school? That might be, if you can identify that person, that might help you with this, because that might get you the information relatively straightforwardly. Thinking about the classroom practices and culture, what works, what do you know about how the child is supported in the classroom, and then the bottom two about metacognition and emotional vocabulary. These are strategies that we know from the EEF and the Research School Network are important things that you may well be doing already with the child, but they may be things that you may need to think about in terms of future practice and future changes. School culture is one of those difficult things to define, but thinking wider than just a classroom, are the whole school strategies that this child might be part of, and how are you communicating with parents? And then there's a whole section on the link with parents and family support, and again, questions to ask yourself when creating this case study. Finally, the wider community. How does the child fit into that? Are they integrated? Do they have support networks? And what external agencies are working with the child? We won't ask you at any stage to share confidential or personal information about these two children. The case studies are there for your benefit. What we will ask you in a future session is your reflections on the process. What did you learn about your school and the provision that you have already that came out through doing this process? What conversations did you have with stakeholders, and how did that go? Remember, part of the process here is the wider culture. And sometimes when we start digging into these things, we find out that not everybody shares the same culture as perhaps the head teacher and the SLT. And so these sorts of activities can be useful for finding some things out. So we're going to be looking again at data and information, collecting information, and then coming up with credible and plausible interpretations. And you will start thinking about data. We'll talk about more about this in terms of you're developing a strategy and changing possibly things that you are doing. And so coming up with the right thing is the real trick. And so this providing credible and plausible interpretations is what we're into. And so within the Research School Network, we use a case study that highlights some of the issues when we're thinking about this. The names of this have been changed for confidentiality reasons, and the process has been simplified somewhat. But if we imagine the school Bellwood Academy, it is a large secondary school, and it has been, at the time of this case study, requires improvement in its rating. It had a history of underperformance from its students, and had recently been taken into an academy with a new head teacher. And so the school had a history of these failed implementations. I think all of us can, if you've been teaching any length of time, can identify strategies that were implemented and not implemented particularly well, and so they withered on the vine after a few months or a couple of terms. And so the staff were kind of used to the idea of things having to change, but that they weren't implemented very well. And so naturally staff become suspicious. They is this going to be worth buying into? And they often, the changes were imposed from above, they weren't consulted on, and so the implementation climate was poor. And there's been a degree of high levels of staff turnover, so there's a recruitment, a retention issue, and staff changes, which is unsettling for students. And so if you look at some data, this SLT collected some data together, and so they had identified that attendance was below the national average. And when they start thinking about this, the heads of year suggest that there's actually some of this, but the bad figures are the root cause of them is a group of students who show particularly high attendance or particularly high absence. These children were generally disengaged from the curriculum and lacking aspiration. And so it seems sensible that there is a strategy was put into place to try to improve the aspirations of these students. So there was some motivational sessions after school, there was some sports coaching, some businessmen came in. These sessions were well attended, but not well attended by the target group. And so as a consequence, there was no real improvement in their attendance. And so we need to think about why might this be? And if you're watching this, you might pause the video at this point and have a think and look back at what we've talked about in terms of data and the data that's been collected. Have they done a rich collection of data? Is there other data that beyond what I've mentioned here that you would have expected them to collect that hasn't been collected? And so what was the problem that's going on here, and how could we rectify it? So the school went back and looked in more detail at data, and it turns out that the gut feeling of the head of year was correct. There were some students that did account for much of the absenteeism. But the important thing here is that when they had started to look at trends, this was a trend that had been going on since year 7, but had suddenly got worse. And so again, following trends in data can be very important when we're trying to diagnose issues. It's also showed that this particular group of students had very low Key Stage 2 literacy data, the literacy results. And so there was a real issue with reading amongst these students. So the question is, can they access the curriculum? Are they going to lessons and not understanding what's going on because they can't read, or they can't access the resources that are being put in front of them? Because of the staff turnover, these groups were often in bottom sets, and that the teachers assigned to them may not have been specialists, and there is some poor behaviour in some of these lessons. And so the students are basically voting with their feet. They can't access the curriculum, they're not being taught particularly well, their behaviour is deteriorating, which means that they don't enjoy the lessons, and so this becomes a negative spiral. So again, if we look through the process in terms of implementation and thinking about plausible and credible interpretations, they had some initial knowledge. The head of year had got a gut feeling, and they'd found some data, and then they gradually improved that, and then started to they come up with a credible interpretation once we start digging more into it. And so it's about identifying the root cause. They thought the root cause was aspiration, and probably in the end, the root cause was probably more to do with literacy and low levels of literacy. And so, you know, the spoiler alert is that they changed their policy. They didn't look at aspiration anymore. They went back to a reading intervention, and that was what's in the end helped their absenteeism. And so in the end, they do build a richer picture, and they can begin to start thinking about weaknesses in the data. Again, snapshots perhaps were the weakness, and looking at trends turned out to be a better solution. So again, thinking about the case study and thinking about the findings there, you know, what questions should we ask at our school to ensure that our pupil premium strategy is targeting the right students? Have we identified the root causes of the problem, or are we just looking at the symptoms? And then perhaps if we look at some different data, will that tell us a different, give us a different answer? So absenteeism was a headline figure, but digging underneath that, there was other data that might help us with this rich evidence. And so another task that is worth doing, that is the outline for this is in the Padlet, is this idea of what's under the surface. The difference between the headlines and maybe what are the quiet trends that are going on. What are the symptoms and what are the causes? And again, the illustration here, which we touched on at the end of session 1, is of a dandelion. A dandelion is a very persistent weed. We have on the surface all the leaves and the flowers and the seed heads, which is the visible symptom of the dandelion. But as we all know, if you pull dandelions up and leave even the tiniest amount of root behind, the dandelion persists, and it can grow a new plant from even the smallest bit of remaining root. And so when we're treating dandelions, we need to get to the cause, and the roots are harder to remove, and it can be more difficult to get rid of dandelions than we had first imagined. So this is an example of what this might look like for a secondary school. I will just bring that up and stop talking for a minute while you read through some of the sections. And we can see that the headline figures are all around pupil progress. The symptoms of this come out in behaviour and a failure to meet predicted grades. And again, another issue around attendance. When we look at, more importantly, and I've highlighted it here, what are the quiet trends in data? We can see that there's been gradually over the years a change in the ability to do the multi-step questions, and there's been a change as the children have over the years they've come into school with below expected standards. And you know, the quiet trend in all of this, on perhaps not so quiet trend, will be the effects of the last few years and lockdowns and COVID and what gaps there are in knowledge and things. So that thinking about the trends in data are quite important. There were things happening in schools before COVID, and so that you may have data for years before then and from their feeder schools. And so again, there's stuff to dig into here. And then what are the causes in this? Again, this could be interviews with stakeholders or interview with other adults in the school that are involved in these classes. It could be coming from learning walks. What's the problem? What are the causes in here? So that document is available as well. And then finally, and I'm aware of the fact that I've talked about a case study, I've talked about pupil premium strategies and thinking about some of those documents. And I know there was a sort of beliefs document that we talked about in session 1. None of this, it's not like homework. We're not going to be marking anything, or critically you do what you can. But in the next session, we're going to be looking at the tiered approach. And this came from research from the EEF and has been adopted by the DFE. And you will know, if you've been involved in the preparation of your pupil premium strategy, that you must complete this in the tiered approach. And so it will be a good idea to start thinking about where you're at with your current strategy, and where the activities that you are already doing, where they fit in. And a reminder that from the EEF is that the tier 1, the teaching and learning section, is deliberately drawn larger than the other two, because this is the one that we know has the greatest effect on disadvantaged student progress. And so thinking about, have you got the balance right between these 3 tiers, will be something that we'll be looking at in the next session. So just a reminder from me again that the next session is on Thursday, the 9th of February, and you'll be sent out the Zoom link for that in a couple of days beforehand. And that all resources, including the recording of session 1, will be in the Padlet, and there is a link to the Padlet. And if at any time I can be of any help, including with hard copies of guidance reports, then please email me, and I can be in touch and get those to you as soon as I can.